Hi, and welcome to Ruby's Ask Me Anything office hours with me, Dan Merrick. I'm Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development at Ruby, and you can ask any question cooking related during this forum. All you actually have to do is enter your question in the top right in the box that says Add Question Here. Just type out your question, hit the black box that says Add. It'll go to our moderation and then show up in the queue right underneath that. If you see a question in that queue on the right-hand side of your screen, you can always hit the heart button to be able to move that further up in the queue to be able to make sure that it gets answered as well. So with that, we're going to start out with some of our questions that have been already typed in here from some earlier students. So Douglas is asking, is there a rule that helps me know when to add sauce early to add flavor or right before serving? For example, a pasta salad will just absorb the sauce, so it needs to be added again if added too early, but other times it enhances the flavor. So traditionally, pasta is usually cooked in the sauce a little bit as well too. So if you're doing something like a traditional pasta sauce, like an Italian pasta sauce, you might make the sauce in a pan, and I usually like to do it in kind of a wider pan to be able to toss the pasta into. But then you actually will boil your pasta separate, and then take your pasta and put it into your saute pan, and then mix it into the sauce a little bit as well. After you do that, it's always good to add just a little bit of the pasta water to kind of help, coat that noodle as well. And what happens here is you're actually getting that flavor to really kind of meld into the pasta. Now, this is actually a great rule that's usually regularly followed. You'll see it in some of the, let's say, the Italian restaurants, where they'll serve the pasta on the bottom and they'll coat it with oil or something and then put the pasta sauce on top of that. That's a little different and it's not as traditional to the Italian cuisine from Italy. Now, not to say it's not wrong or anything, but to be able to get more flavor and more pasta coated with that sauce, it's definitely best just to be able to have that pasta sauce in a wider saucepan or a wider saute pan, and then take the pasta, put it right in there with some tongs, then toss it around, add a little bit of water to it, just a tablespoon or two of pasta water, just to be able to get the consistency of the pasta sauce that you want on that noodle. Then if you want to, you can add a little bit of fat to it, like an olive oil or something. If you don't not doing olive oil, you don't have to do that at all too. You can completely avoid that. But that would also be the time you'd add that fat, would be after you add the pasta water to that. Now, that's the same thing with many different cuisines, to be able to kind of toss the ingredients into the sauce as well, and you'll see that in different Asian cooking as well, to be able to kind of toss that to be able to get the most flavor, so it absorbs into that noodle as it's still cooking as well. Now, for your example with the pasta salad, yes, it will absorb into that, and you might need to add a little bit more, but that just means that as that pasta is cooking, it's absorbing that flavor into it. And if you want a little more sauce to it, that's where that water kind of comes into it to be able to, thicken it up a little bit, to be able to make a little bit more sauce to it, but it also will absorb into the pasta to make a little bit more flavor, and that's totally okay. If you do want it to be, you typically want to serve it directly right after doing that as well. So I hope that helps your question on that, Douglas. All right, Lynn. I noticed that a lot of recipes have lemon, lime, and citrilla. I think that's cilantro in them. And an example is rice, the Hollywood Bowl brown rice salad. The lemon and lime flavors are frequently too sour, and cilantro tastes like soaps. Any substitutes you recommend? So, the cilantro thing is actually a very common thing. A lot of people do think that cilantro tastes like soap, and that's actually a genetic thing. To some people, it does taste like soap. So, you probably want to avoid cilantro. It's not going to taste very good to you at all. So, for particularly, when using acids like lime and lemon, you can actually just tone them back a little bit. You don't have to add as much to them. What I always like to do is use the tasting example. Add a little bit, taste it, see how it is, and if it's you can add a little bit more if you want to. If you add the entire amount that the recipe asks for, sometimes it might be too much. So add a little bit less than it actually calls for. Taste it, see if it's at the right consistent or the right taste that you're looking for, then you can always add more to it as well. For the Hollywood Bowl brown rice salad, you can switch out things like instead of using cilantro, you can use other herbs. So maybe it's like parsley or maybe using basil and something like that would be a great substitute for the cilantro. A lot of people don't like cilantro, so that's actually totally okay to be able to switch some of those things out. Parsley is a more common, thing that people will use as a replacer, but you can also just keep it completely out. When you're talking about, Mexican cooking, a lot of people will switch that out with maybe oregano or parsley as well. But just for the lemon lime, just use a little bit less than you would normally call for. Taste it, see how it goes, and then add as much as you want to it. But if cilantro tastes like soap, it's not really going to change for you. So you probably just want to avoid that and use another herb instead. I hope that helps, Lynn. All right, so Lori, how do I chop onions without tearing up so badly? So this is a common occurrence with onions. It's actually the gases that are being released off of the onions after they've been in the ground for a long time. Now, because those are the gases that are released off of those, one of the best ways to avoid them is to get rid of the gases. And you can do that through a couple different ways. You can put a fan in your kitchen by where you're cutting, so it'll be blowing by to be able to blow those gases out of the way. Set up your cutting board near your exhaust fan by your stove, so the exhaust fan will actually waft the gases away from your face. I do hear people saying like you can freeze the onion for like 10 minutes or so. That'll change the texture a little bit if you do it too long. So I don't usually do that. I usually try to do something like a fan or the exhaust fan is probably my best suggestion for that. It does happen to everybody, and you always cut into one of those onions every so often where you're like, holy cow, this is one of those onions. So if you're doing that, just try to make it so you have a little bit of airflow where you're cutting those up so it doesn't go directly into your eyes. Hope that helps, Lori. Our next one, Tyler. So for the sauteed mushroom recipe, the directions are to add lemon juice when first starting to saute the mushrooms. What is the purpose of adding lemon at this point in the process? I would think the acidity and flavor from the lemon would break down. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really familiar with which sauteed mushroom recipe you're referring to. I know we have many different ones in there. Um, Now, one of the things, if you were to add lemon to sauteed mushroom early in the process, it would help to brown the mushroom a little bit more. But technically, I would usually use the acid at the end of the dish, not at the beginning of it. So if you're uncomfortable with using the lemon in that, you don't have to use it at all. You can add it to the end just to be able to add a little bit of brightness to it. Now, the lemon will actually increase the flavor of the mushroom and help it kind of break down a little bit. That's why it turns brown a little bit. So you don't want to, I usually don't add it too early because it can brown the mushrooms really quickly. And it depends on what the color is you're looking for out of your mushrooms. But it can enhance the flavor a little bit more of that mushroom, giving a little bit more brightness to it, and then giving you more of that umami flavor too at the same time. So that's probably what the purpose of adding that is early in that. But typically I would usually do it at the end just to get the brightness of flavor to that as well. Thanks for the question, Tyler. Julie, when making vegetable stock, is there a dish we can make with all the vegetables versus throwing them away? This is another common question we get very often. And after you're putting all your vegetables into your stock and you're cooking them off for as long as you are, most of the nutrients have actually gone away from those vegetables. They will actually absorb out into the stock itself. So that's where the nutrients are. So the vegetables that are left over don't have a lot of flavor to them, and they don't really have a lot of nutrients or micronutrients left in them as well. Now, we do get the question a lot, what do we do with all the leftovers? And there are a couple solutions with this. You can compost with them, to be able to make that happen. But if you're actually wanting to use them, I used to feed them to my dogs every so often, mix them in with their kibble or something like that, just to be able to get some fiber in there. But you can also make other dishes if you want to out of them. You can do purees, you can do soups if you want to as well. Just remember, you're not going to get a lot of nutrients from them, and you're not going to get a lot of flavor from those leftover vegetables as well. That's kind of the whole point, is to make sure that you're getting all of those nutrients and flavor into your stock. So you can definitely be inventive with them. Just remember that caveat. All right. Thanks, Julie. All right. From Joyce. What low sodium substitutes do you recommend to awaken flavors without adding salt? Doctor recommends low salt intake for my husband, and some things don't go well with amino acid or nutritional yeast. Thanks. So yeah, this is actually was the best thing I can recommend to you is trying to buy in season and trying to buy as fresh as possible. Try to get things that are really close to you as well. So as soon as you pick any ingredient from its life source, its vine or the tree, it's starting to decompose from that moment on. So it's losing flavor and losing nutrients. So the closer you can get it to the source that it was grown, the more flavor it's going to have. So that's one of the best things you can do is try to get really quality ingredients as often as possible to be able to get that big flavor. Now, if you're avoiding salt altogether, there are some other flavor enhancers that you can use to be able to get big flavors out of things. And there are a couple tricks that I love to use that aren't really tricks, it's just chef tips, basically. One is using an acid of some sort, so lemon, limes, vinegars, all of those things. A nice little touch at the end of a dish to be able to brighten it up is a wonderful thing to be able to add into it. Now, you can also do other things like herbs, especially fresh herbs will add a big flavor to things. So, using fresh herbs instead of dried ones can really add a big pop of flavor at the end of a dish. Just make sure you're adding those at the end of the dish and not cooking them down into it. It's okay if you cook them like early in, but you might as well use dry herbs with most of those. For the big flavor, try to go with the fresh herbs as well. You can also go with some other flavor enhancers, like different spices or different, different seasonings to be able to put in. Some of my favorite is like a mushroom powder, where I take different dried mushrooms and put them into the Vitamix and blend them into a powder, so I can use them as kind of a something to sprinkle over something that gives a really big flavor as well. And you can do that with a lot of spices, just kind of tweaking out a little bit on the flavor profiles to be able to make sure that you're getting a lot of flavor out of those. So those are some of my bigger tips for getting big flavor with low salt intake. Hope that helps, Joyce. All right, so Trudy, when is vanilla powder a better choice than vanilla extract, and how is white vanilla made? So, vanilla powder and vanilla extract can be used very similarly. In fact, there's usually a 1-to-1 ratio on each one of those. Um, Basically, the way that the vanilla powder is made is it's just the vanilla seed scraped out, dried out, and it has that brownness to it. And the vanilla extract is held in an alcohol. So, if you're doing something in a high heat environment, the vanilla extract will actually lose the flavor a little quicker than the powder would. And white vanilla is actually completely different. It's from a chemical called, I think it's called vanillin or vanillin, something like that. But it is not actually a vanilla because vanilla bean is brown. And you can't get like that white, that clear, extract basically. So it's a chemical that tastes very, very similar to vanilla. And that's usually used in something like if you're doing baking, like a white frosting or a white cake where you don't want the brown to be able to change the color of the thing that you're looking at. They can also be, used just interchangeably as well, where you can use the white vanilla versus the vanilla extract at the same time. So those are basically kind of a little bit of a breakdown for each one of those. So vanilla powder, great and high heat items as well. When the alcohol might, bake off using the extract as well. All right, Sharon Nolan, a great friend here, and happy Cookbook Month, Dan. What is your favorite culinary book or guide? Cheers. So I love this question. And Shar, you probably know the answer to this, but one of my favorite kind of guides are the flavor Bibles. There are a couple different Bibles, the vegetarian flavor Bible and then the regular one. I love those. They're technically not a cookbook, but it's wonderful because they have a breakdown of all kinds of different ingredients and then show what pairs with them very well. So that's usually kind of my go-to answer on things. But I'm also a big fan of cookbooks. I have a huge collection of cookbooks and love to be able to go through them, even if they're not plant-based. I love to be able to get technique cookbooks. So when I was working on the Jacques Pepin course, was a big collector of all his stuff to be able to kind of look at all the different techniques that go through those. Have been for years on those too. Alice Waters is another one of my favorites. I often will go to the Chez Panisse cookbooks, the Chez Panisse Cafe, the what is it? The Art of cooking with real food, and the second chapter or the second book of those two. More lately, I've been really loving the Blue Zone cookbooks just because I helped to design that class. The Blue Zone American Kitchen and Blue Zone Kitchen are both wonderful books with all plant-based recipes in them that are fantastic and show a wide variety of different, cooking styles and, techniques from all across the world, which is great. The original one focuses on the first five Blue Zones. The American Kitchen focuses on different American communities, and some of the indigenous stuff was just really, really fascinating to me. So, I'm a big collector of cookbooks, and it's hard to narrow down just one. All right. Sorry about the sniffles. I have a little bit of allergies here too. So, Cynthia, question: can you help me with tips for a recipe using tomato paste for a quick sauce without using the olive oil? Heat a 6-ounce can of paste in a quarter cup of olive oil, 4 to 6 minutes to caramelize, and add minced garlic to brown. Willet, then liquid. So, looks like you're looking to make this without oil, basically. And so, I would do the 4 to 6 minutes to caramelize. You're not going to caramelize the sauce. So, I'm guessing you're caramelizing an onion, which you can totally do with just water. So, use the no oil cooking method to be able to caramelize your onion. And then after it starts to brown a bit, I would put in your minced garlic to brown, which it will. Deglaze with just a little bit of water. You could also do other ingredients too. Like you could do a marsala or something like that to add bigger flavor. But you could just use water to be able to caramelize that onion and the garlic, which you do want to have in a pasta sauce if that's kind of what you're making here. And then after that, add your tomato paste to the saute pan to be able to cook it just a little bit and really absorb that garlic and onion flavor. You can puree those all together too after you're done cooking. So I hope that helps. And then if the liquid to be able to make the sauce, so you can kind of expand that out a little bit, and then use your the liquid. I would probably recommend a vegetable stock on that. So I hope that helps. Karen, I was recently gifted some fermented chickpeas. Great. How would you suggest I use them? I thought they would make an interesting hummus, but I'm wondering what other dishes they would be good for, or do you just use them as normal chickpeas? You can just use them as normal chickpeas. Fermented hummus is great. I don't, if you've never tried that, I would highly recommend giving that a try. That's primarily the way that they're used. Is the most of the time they're used in a hummus to be able to get just kind of a little bit of funkier flavored hummus. I've also seen fermented chickpeas being used in chickpea yogurt as a vegan yogurt as well, which is quite good. And that's usually just using the chickpeas to make a chickpea milk, letting them ferment, and then turning that into a yogurt, which is a pretty cool way to be able to use those. All right. The next one's from Wendy. There is a question about chickpea regarding that. Do you use the juice from the can called aquafaba? Um, there's a question about chickpea regarding that. Do you use the juice from the can called aquafaba? And yes, I do quite often, actually. Um, the aquafaba I use as a thickening agent for all kinds of different things. You can use it to make a meringue. You can use it to make a mayonnaise. You can use it for a lot of different things. So the trick is of just whipping it basically like you would an egg, and it'll actually use it as a thickener. There's a lot of protein in it, so it like thickens up. And once you get the air bubbles in there, you can do a lot of really cool things with it. There are a huge amount of resources on the internet. If you just look up what do I do with aquafaba, you'll see all kinds of fun recipes to be able to use aquafaba for. All right, another one from Wendy. What does he recommend for stainless steel? Seems to get pretty hot for the water bead form. I saw one of the demos using oil. So stainless steel, yeah, is great to be able to use for pans. The majority of my pans are stainless steel. I do, yeah, but you can do the water bead great on them. They're easy to clean once you know how to, but stainless steel pans are great. I do avoid aluminum pans completely. I don't use any aluminum pans. Even my nonstick pans are typically steel as well. But yeah, so stainless steel, great pan to be able to use. You can use them with oil, without oil as well, but they work great. Bianca, when a recipe asks for coconut butter, like in the chocolate ganache torte, what would be a good substitute that also helps the torte set up? Ooh, that's a tough one for me. You're basically looking for, because the reason we use coconut butter in that, or coconut oil, is because it does set up really well. Um, if you have an allergen to coconut, I would really recommend talking to Fran, who runs our Essential Vegan Desserts course, because she's such an expert in this and is just genius on the category. So I would probably check out Fran's next event that's coming up and ask her that same question, because she would know very well what would be something that would make a torte set up without using a coconut butter or coconut oil. Sorry, I can't answer that one for you, but a little bit out of my expertise, Bianca. Wendy, I learned how to cut onions without tears. Cut the end that is not at the rooted end. The root end causes the tears. Cut the onions two ways and stop at the root. Throw that out, no tears. Yes, Wendy, that is a common, solution for that is if you cut the root end off, because it does contain a lot of those gases, but they can go into the rest of the onion. So that's kind of playing Russian roulette a little bit, but it does work a lot of the time. All right, Dave. I've been making my own salted caramel maple cream sauce from sap to syrup. That sounds amazing. I've been making a vegan version using coconut cream and vegan butter. After I seal it in jars, it will separate. Why? All right, so let's see your ingredients here using coconut cream and vegan butter, and that's separating. So if you seal it in jars, basically what's happening is the liquid is separating out from the fat. It's actually the same thing that happens in coconut cream in the can. So when you open up a can of coconut cream, you'll typically have the coconut water on one side and the fat on the other. And that's just because the liquid is separating away from the fat. It's just a natural thing that happens. And that vegan butter, it's typically just an oil that has been whipped up until it gets the consistency, and you can refrigerate it to make that harden out. But if you were to let vegan butter sit out at room temperature, it would actually separate as well. But yeah, so the coconut cream and the vegan butter are separating out just a little bit, just a natural thing that happens from those two. As far as getting it, I mean, I don't think that would happen on your caramel sauce, but if it does do that, that might be another great question for Fran on that too. I'm not sure why it would separate from doing those two from sap to syrup, but that sounds fantastic, and I can't wait to hear the result of that. And please share the recipe on your salted caramel from sap to syrup, because that sounds really, really good. All right. Another one from Bianca. Is smoked paprika a good alternative for chipotle powder? And are there other recommendations you can provide, since chipotle powder is not readily available in my area? So, kind of. Chipotle powder and paprika are very different kinds of things. Chipotle powder has a smokiness to it, but it is much hotter than paprika. Smoked paprika and sweet paprika, very kind of different, have that red powderiness to them, but it's more added as like that smoky-ish kind of flavor, has a bit of umami to it, where the chipotle powder is typically added to add heat. So you get a bit of spice to something with a little bit of kick. So the chipotle powder and paprika are very different, but if you're looking for something as a replacement for the chipotle powder, paprika might be a good alternative, but something like a chili powder might be a little closer too. If you can find any kind of a chili powder where it's a specific chili that has been ground up into a powder, that would probably be a good idea to be able to use something like that. You can also make your own dried chili powders. And I'm not talking about the blend of chili powders. I'm saying what you can do is buy dried peppers and put them into a Vitamix and turn them into a powder. And if you do that mixed with a little bit of paprika, you're going to have a really nice alternative to a chipotle powder. So I hope that helps. I do that quite often, actually. I do a chipotle paste all the time, and then I'll buy dried chipotles as well. You can also mail order those, which they ship really well because they're completely dried out. And then I'll typically cook them first, but you can just put them dry into a blender and turn it just into a powder, and it'll actually be really an easy thing to be able to make. It's much like I do the mushroom powders too. So hope that helps. That was a very quick event today for our Ask Me Anything office hours. I hope you guys had a great time, and happy cooking.